I want to say welcome, first of all, to this event put on by Outwards. I'm here in Los Angeles, and one thing I've never done before, but which I've decided to start doing, is to acknowledge that our offices in Los Angeles are situated on what was originally land owned by the Tongva tribe, which was the indigenous tribe that populated large portions of Southern California. And I want to acknowledge that we are currently occupying land that originally belonged to them. Outwards, as most of you know, is the first project to travel the United States, recording the stories of the pioneers and elders of the LGBTQ civil rights movement. We went into production for the first time in the summer of 2016. To date, we've recorded 142 interviews in 26 states. We published a book last year called The Book of Pride, which features our 4 panelists. And we also launched, I think almost as importantly as the book, we launched a digital version of the archive, where we can eventually share all of our interviews, full-length video, full transcripts, as well as photos, free of charge. So it's like walking into a big library. The Outwards archive is and always will be free to the public like any library. And of course, it's extremely important that we make all of our resources available to whoever wants to access them, and there should be no barriers to entry, at least not on the financial front. We have all been rocked by so many events over the last 3 months. In February, if you had asked what the rest of the year was going to look like, none of us could have foretold any of this, except to a certain degree, we could have foretold the part about the pandemic because it was already building steam. And in a sense, we could have certainly foretold this moment in America's ongoing struggle with racism and racial justice, because it was only a matter of time before another incident occurred. In this case, it was the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And it was only a matter of time before this ongoing festering wound in our national consciousness surged into consciousness again. Everybody is wondering and hoping whether this time somehow we might be able to sort of tip over into something new, whether it's in the realm of reform, whether it's in the realm of a sustained protest movement. And today specifically, we want to talk about what does it mean that all this is happening against the backdrop of Pride Month, when normally we might be walking around waving flags and celebrating the gains of the queer community over the past 50 years. So without further ado, I want to hand it off to Andrea. Thank you so much, Andrea, for moderating today. Thank you, Marianne, Michael, Miss Major, and Karen for joining us. We're going to talk with each one of you. We're going to watch excerpts from your interviews, which we are so blessed to have. And then we're going to let the conversation rip, and we'll see where we end up. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Mason. Hello, everyone. My name is Andrea Pino-Silva, and I'm a proud Outwards board member, a social media and an author. I'm honored to get to join to you all tonight and moderate such an incredible panel of queer heroes before us. I honestly can't believe I'm with you all today. I have been out as a queer person for almost 10 years. My queerness came to me at a time right at the heels of sexual violence, when my body felt most foreign and most occupied. Queerness blanketed me with warmth, clarity, and tenderness. Queer love saved me and has been a catalyst for healing, growth, and has always been about resistance for me. And now more than ever, queer love for me as a Latina afforded whiteness in particular is an unwavering refusal of white supremacy and a true commitment to both the investment and nurturing of Black lives today and every day. As a young queer woman of color, I am thankful for the work of queer elders, specifically the members in this panel, who have made this country and our world safer and more equitable for queer people like me. So with that, I'm excited to introduce our panelists, starting with Miss Major Griffin-Gracy, Ms. Claren Clark, Marianne Diaz, and Michael Hickerson. So I'm super excited to start with Miss Major in particular, and this is actually her first appearance after quite a scary moment last year. So I'm so honored to get to be here with you today, Miss Major. So I have the privilege of introducing her, who I consider a movement mother, Miss Major Griffin-Gracy, a veteran of the Stonewall riots of 1969. She's been a tireless advocate for transgender people as well as all queer people throughout her life, bringing joy and community everywhere she goes. So let's see a really quick clip of her interview with Outwards.
beginning, it began. I wasn't found under a rock. What beginning? Beginning for me is human childbirth thing, or me, the weird little fat teenage boy, or me, the woman that got kicked out of college, or me, the bitch that terrorized New York, or me, the father of a child. Yay! Or so beginning. What beginning? How far back do you want to go? I was excited about everything because to me, tomorrow always brings something new. And I went to New York, and talk about happy. And at that time, 42nd Street it was heyday. Walk that block, and everything you can imagine that's in New York is somewhere in that block. Walking around being all glamorous, oh, I can do that. It was heaven. And hooking back there at that time was a fucking blessing. The money was good, the Johns were great. If all the Johns are beautiful, oh, baby, yes, of course. Let me come in the car with you. And then somewhere like in the 67, 68, it got kind of dangerous. There was some guy killing the girls and stuff there. And the police really weren't involved in all. They didn't care, technically. And so I lost a really good friend there. So when my friends and I found out that Puppy had died, we of course called the police station and tried to give them information who we thought no one cared. After that, we started keeping track of Johns that the girls were going with. One of the girls, we would help support her so she wouldn't have to hook. She could just pay attention to the cars that we got in, write down the license number. Boys started coming over from New Jersey with in 4 and 5 in a car, high off of beer and stuff, and throwing full beer cans at the girls as they would drive down the street. So if we figured out a way to stop that car, and they would get out, we would physically fight them. Just, it's time to kick their ass and then send them home. So then they started coming over with weapons that we didn't have. We didn't have knives, or I carried a hammer. Police would come and have a boy who'd had a black eye from one of the girls. She would get arrested and go to jail, and he would tell the boy to go back to Jersey. And for me, that just turned into more political stuff, because my concern was keeping my community alive and keeping us going and keeping us safe. My girls are any transgendered person, the girls who are hooking to survive off the street and trying to make it and get through one day out another, dealing with the police and getting arrested and going to jail and having to deal with that bullshit because the society and the world doesn't care about us. I want them all to know that somebody does. They're like, okay, I'm still here. I have no idea why, but I know while I'm here, I'm not letting this shit rest.
What an interview.
Yes.
Every time I listen to it, I just sit there and I'm like, oh, wow, it's over. Welcome, Major. And there's, I can say so many things, but I want to start off with saying, what do you think, what's it like to see what the movement's become since 1969? And for you as a veteran activist, what's it like to see the current Black Lives Matter protests, especially during Pride Month, and what it means for the queer community and how we should keep showing up?
That is such a large question. I think the thing is that now more than ever, there are enough people involved in their concern over the death of Floyd. And so that will carry us forward, But my hope is that they realize that all Black lives matter. And by all, I mean us. they just forget about it in general. Part of what happened during this time of turmoil, uh, a, a, a gay guy was shot in the back. A girl was beat up by people who happened to be at the place that she was going, you know. And that kind of atrocity is not to be accepted, you know. But you gotta keep your fingers crossed. You gotta hope and believe that maybe this time they will do something and then it'll carry over.
Yeah. Do you feel as if resistance has always been a part of the LGBTQ movement and that it should keep being at the forefront of the movement?
Mhm. Oh, definitely. But I mean, it's hard being locked in now, locked in the house. But you have to always want to be ready to fight. And that includes the politicians that say, oh, well, you know, I have a friend. Well, that doesn't mean anything to us, you know. And we have to fight for this. We have to fight for the stuff. Congress just passed this great law on Monday, but it does no good to work if you can't have health care. How are you going to be at the job if you can't take care of yourself? You know, it's wrong.
And actually, in that same note, how do you strike the balance between joy, celebration, and fighting? Like how do you find a balance between those three things, especially in the context of fighting for another day, right? Like quite literally getting up when things are so terrible, right? How do you keep going? I mean, because you emanate so much joy, and I always wonder how you do it.
You get up in the morning, put your face on, and hit it. You know, I can't say what it is that keeps me going in that vein, but we've got to keep going. You know, we must let them know that we're here, we're not going anywhere, and we're here to stay. That is very important. They've got to realize that we ain't going nowhere. We're not going to disappear because they wish it so, you know. Wishing doesn't make it true.
Yeah. And I'll just say as a young queer person, I mean, you getting to speak to you, I think especially in the context of how visible you've always been is invaluable, and hearing your story and getting to literally share an earth with you. What do you feel like is perhaps more hopeful for queer youth nowadays? What have you found to be something that excites you about just how open, in particular, trans youth and Black trans youth are now, how visible they are?
Oh, wow. I think the most thrilling thing is to see a girl going somewhere and she's in her stuff and she's feeling it and she looks good. And, you know, you ask her how she is and she flips you off and keeps on going. You know, that's what does it.
Yeah, and exactly that, right? This idea of being visible, this idea of being
Yes.
Openly living as a gender you've always known you were, and that in itself is an act of resistance, which
Yes.
is so cool, and quite literally wouldn't be possible were it not for everything you've done for our movement.
I think it would have been. Someone would have came along and started ranting and raving about the bullshit that was happening. So yeah.
You're being humble, right? But I again, it's not even just not just the riots, but quite literally vividly being
Yeah.
For everything. And I think in that same regard, you know, and this is a perfect segue to our next Karen Clark, who's been a visible queer leader in politics throughout her life, representing a majority Black and immigrant district in Minnesota. Karen also lives less than 10 blocks away from where George Floyd was murdered, and continues to be a visible leader in her community. you just can't, you got to watch her interview. So here's a small brief interview and part into her interview.
The roots of my activism probably came from experiences as a young child, learning to stand up to religious discrimination and bigotry. And my mother gave me lessons for a lifetime in how to handle that. You know, just understand that there's ignorance and do the best you can, and you can overcome that and go forward. I came into a very loving feminist community. I have to say I was very lucky at the time. My family were rural farm people. I decided that I needed to have them understand who I was and who I had become. My mother just told me, I will always love you. They came to march with us, my mom and dad. We started something called the Lesbian Feminist Organizing Committee, LFOC. And I was one of the founders, along with my dear friend Janet Dolan. It was an organization that was built on certain principles. We had like principles of unity, and they included things like class consciousness, racial justice. We had an FBI committee, because in those days the FBI was infiltrating lesbian groups looking for whoever. So one of the things that we did was look at the issue of like, should the Lesbian Feminist Organizing Committee get involved in electoral politics? Today, there are so many lemons that we have to turn into lemonade. One of the issues I worked a lot on, because of the wonderful immigrant community that I represent, are things like the driver's license for undocumented workers. Oh my goodness, we came within one vote of passing it about 3 years ago. And it's just heartbreaking that we have not passed that. We have a governor, and he has come out this year. In fact, I just called his office this morning to request a meeting with him, because he not only talked about how we need to pass a driver's license bill as a matter of public safety, he used the word racism as a reason that this needs to be confronted. There's so many things like that, like the difficulty in my neighborhood with toxic exposure, for example. We've been able to move forward with environmental justice in a way, identifying a whole community that's at risk of health impacts from toxic exposure. And the struggle for that belongs to the community, which is what makes me hopeful. I mean, as I leave this work, one of the things that makes me hopeful is to know that people in the community have made some of these struggles their own. They own them. They know the words, they know the language, they know how to organize, and they're going to keep fighting no matter who the next person is to take this seat. You just have to hope. And hope is probably one of the most revolutionary, radical things we can do. With that change is possible.
What is it like to be in Minneapolis right now? And what is it like to see so much energy, and perhaps how has it reinforced your commitment to action, in particular for Black queer people?
I'd say there's two strong emotions associated with what has happened in my community. And I live about 10 blocks from where George Floyd was murdered. And so there is a lot of grief and anger and frustration that has been there from the next day practically. But the second part is that people immediately kind of went to work trying to pretty much some of what has been destroyed in the uprising. And I call it an uprising because it was really an effort to try to change a terrible murder and what had happened. And so there's a lot of healing that is beginning to go. To say, I was just at minutes ago, and then a big police accountability meeting where people are talking about what can we do as residents ourselves, not relying necessarily on the authorities to provide some of what we need. So people are, the first day, I have to plug in my phone, so let me just do that real quick. I'm having technical difficulties today, I guess. Okay, there it is. Okay, I'm back. The first day, people were out there with brooms and stuff, helping clean up some of our most cherished places. Like one of the places I want to mention is Gandhi Mahal. It's a restaurant run by Ruhel Islam that is just an incredible place for the community to gather. It was burned to the ground except for one part that is a community room. And he just said, at one point, he said, let it burn, we need police accountability. And so with that, we are actually looking to help him rebuild. And maybe, we don't know, there's lots of stuff to deal with, insurance and all that, but the important thing I want to say is there is a sense of, this is our community, we're not rely just on authorities to happen, although we are expecting from resources like, I served in the legislature for 38 years, and so I've been watching a little bit as my colleagues are figuring out how do they reinvest in our community. And the good thing that's happening with that is people of color and indigenous caucus, that's, and it's real, and we need to deal with the police brutality, and secondly, we need to reinvest economically in these communities that have been so damaged. So what it's like is a mixture of those experiences and those feelings, you know, feeling sad and hurt, and then also feeling we're going to stand up and fight back and recreate our communities.
Yeah, and that's actually a really great transition to my next question, which is, you know, we sometimes think of activism in the queer community as starting organizations, litigation, which are all very important parts of the movement. But sometimes activism looks like simply showing up. And I think in particular as non-Black queer people, now is our turn to show up more than ever. What for you is the most important thing that non-Black queer people can be doing now, you know, towards our commitment to Black liberation as queer people?
Well, I think we need to use the words, you know, white supremacy and anti-racism in our discussions. They just need to be there. We need to have it right up front. We need to talk about it and know that we don't have the answers. Not all of the answers. We have a few approaches. And I think, you know, taking that attitude is probably the first thing I would suggest that we need to do. That's what I'm trying to do. I think that's what many of my colleagues are trying to do.
Yeah, and that's it's important. Sometimes it's really just naming it what it is. And I think in particular now when you know, a lot of folks are trying to move away, I think it's meant that it really shouldn't take another life. And I think in particular with how many Black trans people, Black queer people are being murdered daily, and their stories do not make headlines, you know, what it means for us to name this crisis as being very much a fundamental priority for the queer community. Absolutely. So the criminal justice system has provided very little justice for Black and brown people, especially queer Black and brown people. Marianne Diaz has been a fierce advocate for queer people who face incarceration and is working openly as a queer brown woman serving her community with passion and honesty. Here's a clip from her amazing Outwards interview.
When I did the time for something I didn't do, that's when I really started thinking about social justice. I go, how can I be convicted of something I didn't do? And then I look around and I go, oh, I know why. Because nobody on the jury is a person of color. Everybody on the jury is white. Because people of color, unfortunately, sometimes get arrested and they can't serve on juries anymore. So then you're never really judged by your peers. You're judged by people who've never been in trouble, who see you as really weird for doing this weird shit. And I was all tatted, I had tattoos everywhere at that time. And so as soon as I walked into that Torrance court for the thing I didn't do, I knew I was convicted. I go, they're gonna convict me. It's just the way I look. It's who I am. It's what I represent. You know, it's what they're afraid of. And the judge, when they said guilty, the judge looked at them and said, how could you find her guilty? There was no evidence. He said, but I can't change your decision, but I can minimize the time. And so he gave me 6 months. And I was really angry about that. I don't think it made me do the next thing, but it reminded me that justice doesn't exist. Not for people of color and people without money. I think those two factors are really important. I have an LGBTQI group that I run in Watts, which is the first one they've ever had. I run it there with men and women from 18 to like 24, in that age range. And some are transgendered, some are just cross-dressers. They call themselves queens, and they've survived that community, you know, being who they are, and a lot of the homies know them and they're cool with them, but they've been beat up a lot on the way, you know. But we're trying to open up dialogue about that in Watts, which hasn't been easy. I had this one guy tell me, "Why do you tell people you're lesbian?" Like, you know, he's an African American guy. He goes, "Why do you tell people you're lesbian? I mean, you wouldn't know." And I go, "I know." He go, "But you're already brown. I'm black. If I'm gay, I ain't telling nobody because I got enough shit." And I said, "Well, me too. But I can't live my life pretending I'm something I'm not. Like, I can't pretend I'm not brown. I mean, there's no way I can do that. You can't pretend you're not black. But I don't like pretending I'm something else that I'm not." And that's important to the people coming up after me, the kids, because there's been so many times in groups where I deal with a lot of teens where I'll say, "And I'm a lesbian," and then somebody in there will say, "I think I'm bisexual." But they wouldn't have said that at any other point if they didn't feel safe. And they know I'm going to take care of them in that group.
I will say that this is probably one of my favorite interviews that I have seen through my time at Outwards. And I will say specifically, as another Latina lesbian, the idea of being visible as a queer woman, as a woman of color, but specifically in the Latino community, is not a very common story. So I'm going to start off by saying, what does it mean to you to be visibly queer within the work that you do?
What does it mean to me? I just can't see myself being anything else, but I think it makes it more possible for other people to be authentic about who they are. If you show up to do work in the community and you show up as an authentic person, willing to take the risks of whatever is going to come, you know, they may feel like it's a brave space to do it themselves. And so I've experienced that a lot with people who would have never, you know, talked to anybody. I'm also a therapist, so, you know, it's something that I think seeing a brown person or a black person or a person of color as a therapist is also very inspiring to people, because most of the time people of color end up with white therapists, and it's kind of a trip because you got to explain so much, you know, about what your life has been. And then on top of that, you put another layer of being a member of the LGBTQI community, and what's that all meant. I mean, you know, I was just talking about this to my staff, my counselors, is that so much of systemic injustice and just racism and the internalized racism that filters into us without us really wanting it to, affected me in so many ways. I mean, I married a guy. I mean, I know I was a lesbian, but I still married a man, and that man was white. And looking back on that, I'm like, man, how intense is that feeling of wanting to belong, that you will do everything against what you feel inside to please everybody around you, which was my family, you know? And I kind of think because I did that, I'm just not going to do that shit no more. I'm not going to pretend I'm not who I am. I mean, how intense does that have to be that you would marry a man and then a white man, and then have all the things happen that your people predicted would happen as far as racism goes by that person that you married? You know what I mean? So yeah, I'm too old to not be me. I'm not going to do it anymore. And, you know, it's interesting because the gang was the most important, to me, helped me develop my courage. Because they didn't seem to have an issue with me being a lesbian at all. At all. Couldn't say the same for any of the men. They never came out. I mean, I knew they were, but they never came out openly. But I think being in Watts and in other communities like Pico Union or other, you know, under-resourced communities, it helps people to see that with all this stuff that we dealt with, we're making some inroads into having some kind, well, it's not at all, but we're going after equity. We're just going after equity. I mean, the systemic effects in Watts and South Central, the recidivism there in that community is, I believe, is on purpose. I mean, the system has you so tangled there and they expect so much of you that you can't untangle yourself. And you end up right back in the place that you were trying to stay out of. So since I've been at Watts, we have like 13 different men's groups that run there, and they're always full. And it's amazing to watch men have conversations about, men that might be in the group that are not coming out because there isn't that support for them to do so. And the men looking at themselves and wondering, am I the person that's preventing this person from being authentic? They're hard conversations. I mean, I've been told that the layers and layers and layers on top of the oppression that people of color feel, and Black men in particular, and then gay men or transgendered men or bisexual men. I mean, it's exhausting, the things they have to deal with, plus have to stay alive in a community where not only are other gang members out there, but there's law enforcement killing us at an extraordinary rate, Black men. So I don't know if I answered your question, but but, I get on this thing, and I'm just, right now I can tell you I'm so outraged right now about things that are happening. I'm so happy about the Supreme Court and discrimination, the discrimination issue against LGBTQI, but I'm still furious about the way law enforcement continues to be protected in what they do to people of color, and particularly Black men. So that's my point right now, and I'm a Latina, and people like me and immigrants have a lot of shit we're dealing with, but we're behind Black Lives Matter, because I think for all lives to matter, Black lives have to matter first. It just has to. It just has to, and that's my effort and my focus right now, and all the people in my community that are brown people are behind it. They get it, and those that don't get it, well, I don't know how better you can explain it. It's been a horrific 400 or 500 years, that Black people have been dealing with, and we don't have to do the oppression Olympics here. We kind of know.
Absolutely. I mean, everything you've said, I don't even know where to start. But I do want to start with the quick note you said about your family and pleasing your family, and I think especially as queer people of color, it's not just the trying to exist in queer spaces. It's also trying to find a space for our queerness in our communities. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's something that I have struggled with in my family. I mean, my family, I'm a first generation American myself. My family is of Cuban descent. And to deal with the anti-Blackness and the adherence to white supremacy in Latino spaces is an ongoing journey. And I say this because I will be unlearning the white supremacy that my family was taught to appreciate for the rest of my life. And I think in particular with where we are right now, I mean, what does it mean for us to be holding our communities accountable, and not just the queer community, but our own non-Black communities as well too, our non-Black communities that are maybe at some point afforded whiteness and what that means. But I do want to say on this context of pushing Black Lives Matter and pushing the conversations around ending white supremacy in our spaces. For you, what do you think has been the most effective in talking to other queer people or other non-Black people in making them perhaps more action-oriented in the struggle for Black liberation? How to get them to get it that this is a fight for all of us?
When I first came into the work, I mean, I was born in the struggle. There's no way I could avoid that. But when I came into actually being like a community activist, and then I got hired at a counseling center. I mean, I was gangster, so I was pretty intense. I could get in your face and really make you feel very scared, and it worked for some. It pushed most people away. So I've learned to have conversations in a way that appeals to people's own feeling of being isolated or rejected in their world. I think everybody's felt it at some point. And if I can appeal to that part and just, get them, I need people to get on board, not because they feel they have to, but because they start to feel like there's a need to. Like, I need to do this. I've been benefiting from this my whole life, being a white person or a straight person, or a person who's born in the gender that they identify with. I mean, being cisgender is such a privilege. You know what I mean? So I talk to people about their privilege. I have privilege. I mean, I'm a brown person and a lesbian, but I have privilege. I live in a home and I have a job and I have a wife and I have a cat who keeps showing up, and I have all those privileges. But there was a point in my life where I wasn't accepted by anybody except for the hood. So I talk to people. I don't want to say gently, but more with an understanding of how they've been saturated in this idea. They drank the juice, you know what I mean? They drank the juice and they're captured by it. And for some people, it's just too hard to imagine that there is a different reality for other people. Like, they want to believe that things are better. And it's like, I keep saying, okay, better for who though? I mean, they've always been good for you. But, if it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter to those people. We're never going to change everybody. That's just not going to happen, But I have such strong allies in my circle that they bring in more allies and more allies. And, we join together, because this movement, this Black Lives Matter movement, is not going to really move until white people really put themselves on the line for it. They have to be out in front.
Absolutely. And continuously showing up, and not just when there's yet another death in the headlines.
Right. Just, it has to be consistent.
Absolutely.
It can't disappear just because now it's no fun to hang out in a street that only has like 2,000 people. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Everybody wants to show up for the 50,000 people.
It's a little safer. And in that note, I'm so excited to move on to our last panelist, Michael Hickerson. Michael's journey to self-love and queer visibility wasn't always easy, but there was plenty of color and music along the way. Queer and Black liberation go hand in hand, and Michael's journey is a beautiful illustration of the blending of these two forces. Here's a small clip from his Outwards interview.
When I was in 12th grade, I worked at the Municipal Auditorium. It's right outside the French Quarter in Tremé area, but it was a venue where all the concerts, all the Mardi Gras balls, and all of this kind of society stuff was held. So we worked these concession stands when they had events going on there. There was one event that did it for me. I saw these men having this, what is now Mardi Gras ball, but I didn't know they were men. They were these women in beautiful dresses and feathers, and having this thing where they promenaded around the floor and they bowed, and was just so elegant. And I had never seen anything like that in my life. I was just fascinated. It was the crew of Apollo. I heard the names and I thought, ooh, I want to do that. The crews are a spoof on straight society. The straight society have these elaborate Mardi Gras balls where these young debutantes become queens. Well, the gay community took it a step further and made it a parody, a spoof on that. Eventually, I joined an organization called the Crew of Amun-Ra. And they had never had a black in their organization. And like a third of the organization quit. Eventually, I was honored to be ball captain of the Crew of Amun-Ra, and I took the crew on into outer space. Then I came from the ceiling of the volume in this space costume with this Patti LaBelle hair and stuff like that, you know, singing Star Love, you know, come with me tonight all across the universe. I'll be 62 in September, you know, and it's taken a long time for me to get to be who I am today. I now know I can walk into a room and not have to hide, you know, my sexuality or anything, not have to hide my blackness. I can be me.
Wow. I think the quote from your interview that sticks out the most to me is this idea of what it's like to walk into a room and not have to hide. I mean, that says so much. So Michael, I want to welcome you, you know, just by asking you, what does Black queer joy look like for you?
Oh, you know, I'm now turning 65, and what you see on the screen is what it looks like. It looks like me. It looks like happiness. It looks like freedom. It looks like being able to be who you are wherever you are. I love today, I would love to have been the queer children of today back then. They are so free. They are so passionate about who they are and wanting you to know who they are and demanding the respect. I think a lot of that comes from us, you know. I mean, we've done a lot. We've done a lot, you know. But these kids today, I mean, I would love to live in the moment today. You know, the kids are so free. They tell you who they are, and they won't take no for an answer. They are who they are. You know, I love that. That's what it looks like. It looks like all of us. Yeah.
It's that's exactly how you say. So I'm a youth leader at Foundry United Methodist here in Washington, D.C. And I will say that being surrounded by children who are so openly who they are, I feel like it liberates me more and more every day.
Yes, yes, it does.
So beautiful, I think, especially now, to see that beautiful joy in liberation. And I think going back to what Major was saying earlier about what it looks like to see somebody living who they are, what Marianne was saying about being visible and other people coming to you, that joy, that visibility is resistance. And I think especially now with there being so much grief, I've gone to a couple of the protests and marches here in Washington, and I went with my partner 2 weeks ago, and what it was like to see so many visibly queer people, not just resisting, but showing up as they are, smiling, cheering, playing instruments. You know, it seems to me, you know, that pride has not always just been about resistance, it's also been about the joy that comes with living openly as you are. Do you feel as if your joy is in itself a resistance? Do you feel as if being who you are is in itself a protest? Or is it more than that?
I think it's much more than that. Being a Black kid in New Orleans, living in the ghetto, was very, very hard. It was very difficult. So, and when I came out, I got some of that same resistance from from our white counterparts. You know, that I did not belong there either. You know, so I had to work very hard, you know, to stand my grounds, to prove that I belong there, that I have a place at this table as well. You know, it's been a struggle, but you know, I believe the more you fight, especially when you're fighting for what's right, the easier it gets. You know, you begin to fight and you understand what you're fighting for, so you can go in there, prepared. Hopefully not to fight, but prepared, because you understand what you need to do and how you need to do it. That prepared me to be able to do the things that I was able to do in our community, as a leader in our community.
Absolutely.
New Orleans is tough. Yeah.
I can't even imagine what it was like, especially back then for you. But having lived in the South, calling that the South home, I know a little bit about the challenges, but also the beauty that comes from being who you are in a place like the South, and especially reclaiming the South.
Exactly.
But I do want to say one last thing before we go to Q&A. How do you feel like your Blackness has influenced your queerness? I mean, how do you feel that it's different and perhaps brings you more joy in the queer community?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. My blackness in New Orleans has opened the doors for lots of things, lots of change in New Orleans. One of the organizations that I belong to never had any Black members in their organization, and when I joined the organization, a few of the members quit. But I think it opened up a whole new world to that organization. As a result, they got some other Black members in. We were able to, from that organization, start organizations that were geared towards African Americans. The Blackness took me somewhere. Yeah, I used it. Sure, I used it, and it got me somewhere, and it got the community further. It taught the community, because I was one of those ones that didn't take no for an answer. I'm gonna be there, and I'm gonna fight to be there, because I believe that I belong there.
I'm loving this, and I think especially when I think of what I want the LGBTQ movement to look like for my youth, for example, some of whom are already texting on the chat box, by the way, my middle schoolers are here. I want there to be a return to community, right? Which has always been such an instrumental part of the queer community, beyond the rainbow flags, beyond the protests. It's what it's like for us who have always been a part of our community and to continue being visible. What it means for you to stay in New Orleans, what it means for you to be doing work in spaces where perhaps rainbow flags aren't at every house. And why that visibility and that continued investment in particular Black and Brown communities is so integral to moving the movement forward.
Particularly in the Black community in which I was raised in, being gay was absolutely taboo. I mean, you were a boy and you were going to be raised as a man, and you were going to grow up and have a wife and children and all of those things. And anything that didn't resemble that was not normal, and it was not to be tolerated. Well, I wasn't that kind of kid. I wasn't that kind of kid to follow what they said follow. I had to follow me. I had to do me. I had to follow my journey. As a result, I got some whippings from the boys in the neighborhood and all of those kind of things, but I hung in there. I fought them back, and I made my way. I made my way to understand that I got to be who I am. And that's the only way I can live on this earth, is be who I am. So I grew up always thinking I need to be Michael. I knew I was different from all the other boys, but I knew I had to be me, and I made it. Yeah. And now I'm so happy to see the young kids these days being who they are, being their true self, not hiding in a world that, where we had to hide in, they're out there. And it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. I love it. Yeah.
And that's a beautiful way to end the panel. And I want to thank you all for being here. And we're about to transition over to question and answers. And I'm going to ask Ray, our staff member, to come back on camera. So you can either ask your questions by posting them on the chat box and Zoom, or you can also raise your hand and come on camera and ask any of the panelists any questions you so desire. So I'm loving this conversation about joy as resistance. And it's something that has come up time and time again in my own circles, and that my partner and I talk about all the time. Because I mean, I've relied on anger, and I think anger is instrumental to activism. But in my own work as a movement leader, I have found that joy is really what keeps me going. And I think in particular, an investment in young people, an investment in my community is really what sustains me beyond anger, because anger for me can be very exhausting. So I think what I'd love to ask you all is what brings you joy? And how is that joy both an act of resistance, but also an act of an investment in our community? And any of you can answer it if you want to.
I think my joy, and I really do. I really get joy waking up in the morning, you know, getting a cup of coffee, going out on my porch and sitting there and knowing I am me. You know, I can be me. I can, you know, I can just be me. I live in I don't live in New Orleans anymore. I live in a suburb of New Orleans. It's like 30 miles outside of New Orleans. And I live in an area where there's lots and lots and lots of Trump voters, you know, and then there's me in this area, you know. I'm not afraid, you know. I live in, you know, I live in a predominantly white area, you know. I'm with all Trump voters, you know, and I have a partner who's a white guy, and then there's me, this black guy. There's one black guy that lives in this neighborhood with amongst all these other folk. I'm saying this to say, I get up in the morning and I tend to my garden, I walk down the streets, and I am just proud to be me. I'm not afraid of anything out there because I know who I am. And that comes from years of struggling to find out who I am and understanding who I am and getting there. And I'm there now.
Well, you know, I feel the same way he does about being happy, because I get up, put my sick face on, and then start my day. So it's not really a matter of what's going to upset me or whatever. I start off happy.
That's
and
right.
that is awfully important. Yeah.
Yeah, I can say what makes me happy is having a wife that I love completely, and not being afraid to tell people in the world that I have a wife, and her saying the same thing, and not having to hide that fact, and being proud of it. And also, I mean, working with the kids that I work with, you know, I think what Michael said earlier is having the kids be able to correct us when we misgender them, or if anyone misgenders them, and actually not get, well, from the people I hang out with anyways, not get pushback on it, but to say, I'm sorry. You know, I wasn't aware that that today you're going to show up as Glenn. You know, when a few weeks ago you showed up as someone else, because kids that I'm running into are figuring it out in the open. They're not hiding it. They're doing it in front of you. Like they're figuring out who they are. And I think that happiness is that there's at least enough safety in the environment that we've created at the counseling center and in Watts, where they can actually, you know, do it in real time, like figure out who they are, you know, and have the support that you need to figure out. Even if I don't even know if you have to figure out who you are, honestly, I think that you are who you are at that given moment, you know. but that brings me joy that there's a kind of a freedom to do that with our younger kids, especially the middle school kids I'm dealing with right now. I mean, like, being gay or lesbian is like, oh, whatever, you know, that's no big deal.
Yes.
It's like, oh, whatever, you know, okay. You know, you say you have a wife or a husband, okay, so what else? I mean, there's this kind of.
I love that attitude. I
Yeah.
love that attitude.
And it's like, what you thought, you know, that's nothing. That's no big deal. I mean, I'm cool. I mean, you're cool. I think, you know, I've had kids say, you know, I was gendered at birth. I had no choice of that. They gave me a label, but they were totally off. They were off the mark, you know? And my parents are like trying to figure this out and trying to be supportive. You know, that we can have those discussions, to me, is amazing. I remember being in middle school. There was no fucking way.
Yeah. You're exactly right.
What would have happened? There's no way. I'm really proud of the things that I think, as our little community here on this Zoom, that I think we contribute in some way to this.
You have, and I know you all have been very humble and haven't claimed it, but I think again, the world's a better place for me, for my middle schoolers, and for so many other people who are on this call. And in that note, we have a question from our audience. How should activists, in particular young activists, prevent burnout, especially amid both the pandemic and nationwide violence against Black folks that we're seeing today?
You know, as far as young activists go, you should always take time for yourself.
Yes.
Have the courage to step back when you need to, and then step out there when you need to. Being caught up in that day of, oh, what am I going to do next, isn't going to solve the problem. So take a time, a moment for yourself. You know, that's what works for me.
And I also think understanding that there are more people in the fight than just you. You know, you can only do what you can do. You know, and like Miss Major said, step back and take care of yourself. Yes.
Yeah, I think self-care is very important. I wasn't very good at it in my 30s. But now that I'm in my 60s, I'm going to take that time out to breathe. I'm just going to breathe, and I'm going to try to meditate a little bit, and I'm going to try to do some self-care. If, you know, watch something that makes me laugh, you know, laughing is so important, you know, because everything's so intense right now. And, you know, I'm starting to watch some real stupid stuff on TV, but it makes me laugh. And so so I'm watching it, you know, because I have to disconnect that part of myself that's in the fight all the time. And for young people, I think, you know, the more you take care of yourself, the longer you can be in this.
That's right. That's right.
And that's powerful, right? This idea of fighting for another day. So in that note, Marianne, you mentioned that justice just simply doesn't exist for some communities. I think that's a very powerful statement. You know, what is justice? Do we feel as if resistance and, you know, resisting whiteness, the state has its limits? I think in particular in terms of our own survival. You know, at what point is resisting not enough? At what point do we refuse certain things, whether it's refusing whiteness, refusing to stay quiet, refusing to be angry, or refusing to not show joy? At what point is refusal the answer, perhaps, instead of just resistance?
Well, refusal is a very big word. You have to refuse to accept the status quo. That's first and foremost. You can't let them tell you what's best for you. You've got to angrily or quietly or passively, whatever it takes, you must stand up to who you are, what you stand for. You know, you can't look at me and say, I'm ever going to be white. You know, no, I can't be white, and no matter what I do. So therefore, I've got to accept who I am and move it forward. I live in Arkansas, and I'm not going to change myself to suit the status quo. You know.
Yeah, I've encouraged whiteness is also very important in this fight. If whiteness can use whiteness and privilege of whiteness to move the needle a little bit on our behalf, that helps, you know, because I used to do this when I used to go with kids to court. I used to tell my white colleagues, like, put on a tie, we're going to court. You're going to go up on that witness stand. You're going to speak on this kid's behalf. Because I go up there, they don't hear me. They don't really hear me, but they'll hear you because you look like that judge sitting behind that podium. You look like that DA. And I think that if more people use their whiteness to, you know, promote social justice, if they understand how much they are a part of the solution to this, I think for me, that's when social justice, when we're both putting some skin in the game, it helps. We've been putting skin in the game since, you know, whenever. But when white people start getting some skin in the game and start taking some sacrifices and losing some privileges and stuff because nobody wants them around because they got our backs, we'll see what happens.
And that's a powerful thing to say, right? What does it mean to give up some privilege? And I will say in my own personal experience, I think in particular as a first generation American, you know, this idea of being taught to assimilate. I mean, like that's like it's a very Latino story. It's something that we teach our children without even realizing it. You know, my grandfather would always say, quédate con la cabeza abajo, like keep your head down, try to pass, right? But I do think that there's idea, you know, Michael, like you were saying, of living openly as yourself gives young people permission to do the same. It allows them to imagine something otherwise, right? Rather than just, I mean, for me, I had literally never seen another queer Latina, like ever. I didn't know what they looked like. And when I worked at the National Center for Lesbian Rights, one of my colleagues was not only a queer Latina, she was a queer Cuban from Miami. And what it meant for me, even as a person that was visibly out, to see somebody from my community that had been out for 10 years longer than me, I mean, it made me feel more confident. And that's actually a great transition for another question that we have from our guests is, do you feel as if, you know, being older and surviving so many challenges gives you the hope and desire to let other folks hope for more and hope for more change? Do you feel as if you have more of an investment in continuing to be visible because you want to make things better for the folks who are going to inherit our movement?
I'd like to say that I definitely feel that investment. I had one of the sweetest things happen the other day. I was going out to help do a little bit cleanup in one of the community restaurants, and a young woman there said, "Hey, Karen, I want to tell you something." And she said to me, "I and my girlfriend are coming out to my parents, and they seem to be kind of okay with it." I was thrilled to see that she was able to share that, and that it meant so much to her to be able to talk to an older person. And I just said, "Oh, love young is beautiful. Young love is just beautiful." and it was really, it was a sweet moment. And I know that it meant something to her to have, you know, an elder person and who she knows somewhat give her that kind of feedback. It sure made me happy. Oops, having some trouble with my phone. Okay.
I personally can't not smile whenever I see any queer person holding hands and or being visible in public. Sometimes I wonder if it's a little creepy, but I think we all kind of agree with it. We all kind of people. And I think, again, it's permission of feeling that community and that joy. And actually on that note of how we interact with youth and kind of make things better for them. So one of the questions we have is do you believe social media has allowed folks to find more space for authenticity and vulnerability? And in that same note, do you feel as if there's still a very visible divide in generations in the queer community? Or do you feel as if this increase in openness is allowing us to have these intergenerational conversations.
Well, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You take it.
Oh, okay. Well, I believe social media, particularly the television, has allowed gay people to come into homes where they weren't before. You know, some of the television shows, you know, has educated the community about around gays and gay issues, the LGBT community, and the issues that we face. You know, without some of these shows, some people would not have any interaction or with a gay person. You know, so I think that's a good thing. You know, it shows us in the light in which we are. You know, we're not rapists and crazy people. We're just normal, everyday human beings who wants the same equality as everyone else. You know, television helps with that, you know. And I believe Facebook does also. You know, Facebook gives us an opportunity to meet others. You know, imagine this little boy in a rural America who knows he's gay, but doesn't know anyone else around him. Facebook gives him that opportunity to meet someone like him, interact with him, and learn from each other. You know, I think it's a good thing when it's used properly.
Yeah, it is. You're right. So I'll just say yes to that.
It's exposed the gay community to, you know, to the world. Yeah.
Yeah.
We see ourselves now.
Yeah.
You know, and I do think that I pay attention a lot to, you know, the way capitalism works and how we, you know, how commercials have started to show gay couples in products that have nothing to do with being LGBTQ, or it's becoming part of the fabric of the people they are trying to attract to get their products, you know. And I've seen more interracial couples on commercials and more LGBT people on commercials, and you know, it opens up people's minds to like that there's something other than what you believe is the only way to be, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I remember when they wouldn't use a Black person to advertise for toothpaste because, oh, we didn't care about teeth, you know. So as time has changed, you know, it's turned into a good thing. It's turned into a good thing.
And that visibility is just so important because it goes so beyond, again, just the protest, just Pride Month, this idea of our stories being visibly part of our society, and that visibility really being what we've always wanted, right? Being for other people to have the joy that we have beyond our communities, especially in places where, you know, perhaps people haven't felt safe before. And it's really thanks to the work that you all have done that we are getting closer and closer to that reality. And with that, I want to say thank you so much to all of our panelists and all of our guests for being with us tonight. And I'll pass it over to Mason.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. And I also want to say thank you so much to Miss Major and Marianne and Karen and Michael for your participation, for bringing your incredible full lives to us, both through your Outwards interview and of course through your presence here today. Each one of you is such an incredible container of so much life experience that even though we're all part of the queer community, yet each one of us has lived such a different life. And to be able to bring your perspectives together in this way today has been really magnificent. I have one last question that's been kind of burning in my soul. This is a question that I oftentimes ask our interview subjects. As you know, there's incredible diversity within our community, diversity of opinion, diversity of approach. And one of those big areas of divergence or diversity is about what we might have lost as we've gained more acceptance, as we've gained more, even you might call it assimilation. I sometimes feel like we stand in danger of losing what makes us us. And I wonder how you all feel about that. What's important to hold on to, even as we get married, even as we have sort of mainstream jobs and live our lives and enjoy the benefits of our movement and our progress? What do we have to make sure we hold on to? It's us.
Mason, first of all, thank you. I appreciate that. But one of the things that I think we have to worry about as far as the assimilation goes is don't worry about it, because my life will continue on. My family will continue on. And so don't be concerned and worry about what you give up to get this, because what you do give up should have been gone in the first place. And I have a partner who he's pregnant, and so I don't concern myself with what's going to happen next. I try to live in the moment. So I don't be concerned about what I'm giving up,
Thank you for that. Others?
Yeah.
I think it's similar to like when we have race discussions, right? When I hear somebody say to me, we're all the same, it offends me. It totally offends me. It's like, no, we're not. No, we're not. I mean, that you're a white person wanting to say that offends me because it makes you feel comfortable in trying to say we're all the same. You would like me to be more white and make you more comfortable by being more white in the way I act and talk and behave and whatever whiteness is. But I think I feel the same way about being a lesbian. I don't ever want to not remind people that my experience has been different because I'm a lesbian. I've had people treat me shitty because they found out. Or just have people assume, like, hey, does your husband know what you're doing for a living? Does your husband happy that you're, and it's like, no, my wife is cool with it. It kind of forces you to come out all the time, right? So I think that's what I kind of feel the same way. Like I want to be included. I want to be, I want to be included in the world we live in, but I don't ever want to forget or have people forget that there's been a unique experience that those of us have fought through to get where we're at.
I agree with you, Marianne. And I don't want to sound like I want my cake and eat it too. Okay, so I'm gonna put that out there, But I do want to keep my LGBTQ culture. I want to keep my community. I want to be able to still go to a gay bar that's a gay bar. That's no longer, that neighborhood gay bar. I still want to be able to go there and be with my friends, and not have all of these other people come in and, and infiltrate and dilute and just take away from the privileges that I've had of being gay. I still want to keep that segment of society. I want that. I don't want it all mixed up, yeah. If that sounds like wanting your cake and eat it too, then so be it.
Yeah. Karen, you're muted, but I just want to see if you have something to say. Can you unmute yourself, Karen? Or can someone unmute Karen?
There we go. That worked, okay. Yeah, I wanted to kind of build on that last part, which is, you know, I think some of what the loss has sometimes been is a sense of the challenge that we bring to the status quo just by our very existence. I don't want to give that up. I think that that's important, that the way we challenge the structures of heterosexism, of white supremacy, of you know, racism in general, of ableism, all those things that I think our community has struggled really to incorporate and be part of, and just our very existence of who we are. We've been outlaws to a certain degree, and I think that has helped make some of the change in the movement. So I don't want to lose that ability to help create the change that's really fundamental, if that makes sense. And I think it fits with what was just said about, you know, being ourselves is really important, but it's partly because of who we are. It's so challenging to what's out there right now.
I just want to say, as like the young person on this panel, right? That makes me say that every once in a while. Like, you know, you're a little younger than me. Also, I just want to also say that I am no longer the youngest generation in existence right now, so I cannot speak. I will say that I'm loving this framing of outlaws and keeping space that are ours. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I will say it's really powerful about embracing not just the diversity of our society, but diversity within the queer community, right? Because I think some spaces should be Black queer spaces, some places should be Black and trans queer spaces, some places belong to members within our own community. And I feel that especially strongly as a queer woman. I'm part of an amazing film called Ahead of the Curve, and I'm the impact producer for the film. And one of the things we talk about is this idea of queer womanhood and queer spaces for queer women. And for me, it's any person who has any affinity to queer womanhood, literally trans women, non-binary people who have an affinity to queer womanhood, and what it means for us to have those spaces that are for us. Yes. And I think very much this idea, like preserving gay bars that belong to us, you know, just because there's more and more of us that are coming out every day doesn't mean that those spaces should not be ours. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I feel very similarly with what's going on now with the Black Lives Matter protests, is I'm very much a guest as a non-Black person. And that is my role. My role is to show up as a body, to listen and to learn. And I think it's okay for us to want that of our allies as well, because I think it makes us stronger as a community to continue preserving spaces that are ours, that are healing spaces for our community.
Yeah. Well, we could go on so much longer. I want to say one quick note on going off of Andrea. One of the most profound and interesting experiences I've had as creator of this project was interviewing women who come out of the radical lesbian separatist movement. Women, one particular in Seattle, Washington now, and another in the Ozarks in Arkansas, who were, you know, that's what they believed. They believed they needed to create their own spaces first. And they told me that for years, they didn't talk to any man who wasn't a mechanic or a waiter. That was it. And I think that was an incredible, and I guess I could say, thankfully, times have changed because they allowed me to come interview them. Once upon a time, they would not have allowed me to set foot on their property, much less interview them. So times change. But that was such an incredibly important moment. And without that moment, these women would not be who they are today. And our community wouldn't be where we are today. Yeah. So I honor them along with all of you. I want to say just a couple of wrap-up words about Outwards. First of all, I see there's at least 5 questions in the Q&A that didn't get answered. I want to invite anybody who's on this panel and thank you all for joining us and listening in. Please contact us at info@theoutwordsarchive.org. The URL is right there on screen. It's just simple, info@theoutwordsarchive.org. Send us any questions you might have. I want to also, of course, invite you to our free digital storytelling platform at theoutwordsarchive.org, where you can see, at present, you can see 33 of our full interviews, but we are preparing to upload another 20. And eventually every single story that we've recorded will be available there. I want to say that any donations tonight to Outwards will be shared 50%. Of course, I'd love to keep 50% for the work that we do, creating panels like this and finding people like this to interview. But in honor of this occasion tonight, we will, I would say for the rest of this week, any donations, even if it's $1, $5, $10, we're gonna share 50-50 with among the many incredible organizations doing work for racial justice in our country. One that I've always been very moved by is called the Equal Justice Institute in Montgomery, Alabama, EJI.org, founded by Brian Stevenson, who wrote an incredible book called Just Mercy. There's so many organizations doing important work. This just happens to be one that I've intersected with. And so any donations to the Outwards Archive this week, we will happily send 50% on to the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama. And again, their website is eji.org. With that, and that was just posted in the chat box as well. Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Ray and Andrew, for your assistance. Thank you, Andrea, again, so much for coming on and moderating as the token young person on the panel tonight. And I just hate to say goodbye, but I think for now we should sign off, and we'll all meet up again, I hope very soon down the road. So thank you all.
Thank you all so much. Good night.
Good
Thank you,
night.
Michael.
Good night.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.